I am standing in my parents' kitchen, looking at my entire family sitting around the dining table, waiting for me to forgive my brother Derek. I used to believe that family was the safest place in the world, a place where no one could ever betray you. I was wrong. The price I paid for that belief was more painful than any wound I ever received during my time in the military. This story begins 7 years ago when I still believed in love and loyalty. Before I begin, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you loved and trusted, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what I did next shocked everyone in that room. My name is William, and I grew up in a small town in Ohio. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where neighbors waved at each other every morning, and where life moved at a pace that felt comfortable and predictable. My father Robert worked as an electrician, spending long hours fixing wires and installing panels in homes and businesses throughout the county. My mother Linda was a nurse at the local hospital, working night shifts more often than not to help make ends meet. We were not rich, but we never went hungry. We were a typical middle-class American family. Derek came into this world 4 years after me. From the moment my parents brought him home from the hospital, I felt a sense of responsibility toward him. He was my little brother, and I was determined to protect him from everything bad in this world. When he was learning to walk, I was there to catch him when he fell. When he started school, I walked him to the bus stop every single morning. When he wanted to learn how to throw a football, I spent countless hours in the backyard teaching him the perfect spiral. There is one memory that still stays with me to this day. Derek was in 6th grade, and there was a group of older kids who had been picking on him for weeks. They would steal his lunch money, push him into lockers, and call him names that no 12-year-old should ever have to hear. One afternoon, I found Derek sitting behind the bleachers at the football field, crying his eyes out. He had a black eye and a torn shirt. Something inside me snapped. I found those kids the next day. There were 3 of them, all bigger than me, but I did not care. I fought all 3 of them at once. I ended up with a broken nose and bruised ribs, but those kids never touched my brother again. That was the kind of bond we had. I would have done anything for Derek. I truly believed that nothing could ever break the connection between us. When I was 23 years old, my life changed in a way I never expected. It happened at a small coffee shop on Main Street, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and the smell of freshly ground beans always hanging in the air. I had stopped in one morning to grab a cup before work, and that is when I saw her for the first time. Jessica was working behind the counter that day. She was a part-time barista while she finished her degree in accounting at the community college. The moment I laid eyes on her, I forgot what I had walked in to order. She had dark brown hair that fell just past her shoulders, and her eyes were this pale shade of blue that reminded me of the sky on a clear winter morning. But it was her smile that truly captivated me. When she smiled, it was like the whole room got a little bit brighter. I noticed she was reading a book during her break, some novel about time travel and lost love. I made some awkward comment about it, and she laughed. We talked for almost 20 minutes until her manager gave her a look and she had to get back to work. From that day forward, I found myself at that coffee shop every single morning. I told myself it was because they made the best coffee in town, but we both knew that was not true. After 3 months of daily visits and increasingly longer conversations, I finally gathered the courage to ask her out to dinner. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant on the edge of town. We talked for 4 hours straight, closing down the restaurant without even realizing how much time had passed. By the time I drove her home, I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with this woman. Our relationship grew slowly but deeply. There was no rushing, no pressure. We simply enjoyed being together, learning about each other, building something real. After 2 years of dating, I decided it was time to take the next step. I took her back to that same coffee shop where we first met. Got down on one knee, right there between the counter and the window table, where she always took her breaks, and asked her to marry me. She cried. I cried. The whole coffee shop applauded. Our wedding was small and intimate. We held it in my parents' backyard with only family and close friends in attendance. Maybe 50 people total. My mother spent weeks preparing food, and my father built a wooden arch for us to stand under during the ceremony. Derek was my best man. During his speech at the reception, he raised his glass and said that I was the greatest brother anyone could ever ask for, and that Jessica was lucky to have me. Everyone cheered. I felt like the luckiest man alive. The first year of marriage was everything I had dreamed it would be. Jessica and I rented a small apartment near the center of town. She had finished her degree and started working at an accounting firm. I was working at a manufacturing plant doing quality control on the assembly line. It was honest work, but the pay was not great. We were barely scraping by, and the dream of owning our own home felt further away with each passing month. That is when I made the decision that would change everything. I decided to enlist in the United States Army. The military offered a stable income, excellent benefits, and the chance to save enough money to finally buy Jessica the house she deserved. When I told her about my decision, I could see the worry in her eyes. She knew what it meant. Long deployments, dangerous assignments, months apart with nothing but phone calls and letters to keep us connected. But she also knew why I was doing it. For us. For our future. I made her a promise that night. I told her I would always come back to her. I told her I would build her a house with my own 2 hands if I had to. She held me tight and said she believed in me. Before I left for basic training, Derek came to see me off. He hugged me and made a promise of his own. He said he would take care of Jessica while I was gone, that he would make sure she was never alone or in need. I thanked him from the bottom of my heart. I had no idea what those words would come to mean. Basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. 10 weeks of physical and mental challenges that pushed me to my absolute limits. There were moments when I wanted to quit, when my body screamed at me to stop, but I kept going. I kept thinking about Jessica, about the life we were building together, about the promise I had made to always come back. That got me through the darkest days. After basic training, I was assigned to Fort Hood in Texas. Life on base was regimented and disciplined, a far cry from the freedom I had known back home. But I adapted. I made friends. I found a sense of purpose in the structure and camaraderie of military life. One person who became particularly important to me was Sergeant Thompson. He was a grizzled veteran in his late 40s, with 2 failed marriages behind him and a cynical view of love that he was never shy about sharing. I remember one night we were sitting outside the barracks, looking up at the stars. Thompson took a long drag from his cigarette and said something that stuck with me. He said that distance was the greatest enemy of any marriage. He said that no matter how strong the love, no matter how deep the commitment, time and space had a way of creating cracks that could eventually break everything apart. I laughed it off at the time. I told him that Jessica and I were different, that our love was strong enough to survive anything. He just shrugged and said he hoped I was right. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. Jessica and I would video call every week, sometimes more. We would talk for hours about nothing and everything. She would tell me about her day at work, about the new recipe she tried, about the funny thing the neighbor's dog did. I would tell her about training exercises, about the guys in my unit, about how much I missed her cooking. Those calls were the highlight of my week. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things started to change. Around the 6-month mark, Jessica began responding to my messages less frequently. Our video calls, which used to last for hours, started getting shorter and shorter. When I asked her if everything was okay, she always had an explanation ready. She was busy with work. She was tired. There was nothing interesting to talk about. I told myself not to worry. She was just adjusting to life without me, just like I was adjusting to life without her. Then came the phone calls where I started hearing Derek in the background. The first time it happened, I thought nothing of it. Jessica explained that the kitchen faucet had been leaking and Derek had come over to fix it. That made sense. Derek was handy with tools, and I was grateful that he was keeping his promise to look after her. I even thanked him through the phone, and he responded with a quick, "Yeah, sure," before Jessica changed the subject. Looking back, I should have noticed how uncomfortable he sounded. Over the following weeks, Derek's name came up more and more often. Jessica mentioned that Derek had helped her change a flat tire. Derek had accompanied her to the grocery store because she did not like going alone at night. Derek had come over for dinner because he said he was tired of eating alone. Each story seemed innocent enough on its own, but together they painted a picture that made something in my gut twist uncomfortably. I tried to push those feelings down. This was my brother we were talking about, my own flesh and blood. The same kid I had fought 3 bullies for the same kid I had taught to throw a football. The same kid who had stood beside me at my wedding and called me the greatest brother anyone could ask for. There was no way he would ever do anything to hurt me. The very thought felt like a betrayal of our bond. Sergeant Thompson noticed that something was off. One evening he found me sitting alone staring at my phone with a troubled expression. He asked what was wrong. I almost told him everything, but the words got stuck in my throat. How could I admit that I was suspicious of my own brother? How could I voice those fears out loud without feeling like a paranoid fool? I just shook my head and said it was nothing. Thompson gave me a long look, but did not press further. 6 months into my service, I received orders for deployment to Afghanistan. This was what I had trained for, what I had signed up for. A 9-month assignment in an active combat zone. The reality of what I was about to face should have consumed all my thoughts, but instead, I found myself more worried about what was happening back home than what was waiting for me overseas. Communication became much harder once I was deployed. The base had limited facilities for personal calls, and the time difference made scheduling conversations nearly impossible. I could only call home once a week if I was lucky. And with each call, Jessica seemed more distant. Her voice lacked the warmth it used to have. Her answers were shorter, her laughter less genuine. She always seemed distracted, like she was just going through the motions of our conversation. I tried calling Derek a few times to check in to ask how Jessica was really doing. His responses were always vague and hurried. "She is fine," he would say. "Everything is good. Do not worry about anything." But something in his tone told me that he was not being entirely honest. There was a nervousness there, an eagerness to get off the phone that had never been present before. One night, I could not sleep. It was around 4 in the morning local time, which meant it would be evening back in Ohio. I decided to call Jessica on a whim, hoping to catch her by surprise, hoping to hear that old warmth in her voice. She answered on the 5th ring, her voice groggy with sleep. She must have dozed off early, she said, but she had forgotten to hang up the phone properly. And in the silence that followed her words, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of another person breathing. Deep, rhythmic breaths right next to her. I did not say anything. I just ended the call, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I lay awake for the rest of the night staring at the ceiling of my bunk, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. Maybe it was the television. Maybe it was a recording. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me because of the stress and the exhaustion, but deep down, I knew the truth. I just was not ready to face it yet. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I was in a combat zone surrounded by danger at every turn, but my mind was thousands of miles away. Sergeant Thompson had to pull me aside after I nearly walked into a dangerous situation during a patrol. He grabbed me by the collar and told me to get my head straight, or I was going to get myself and my squad killed. He was right. Whatever was happening at home, I could not let it compromise my mission or put my brothers in arms at risk. I made a decision that day. I needed to go home and find out the truth for myself. I started counting down the days until my leave. I completed my deployment 3 weeks earlier than originally scheduled. Our unit had accomplished our objectives ahead of timeline, and command authorized early return for those of us who wanted it. I practically ran to sign the paperwork. I did not tell Jessica I was coming home. I wanted to surprise her. At least that is what I told myself. Looking back, I think some part of me already knew what I was going to find, and I needed to see it with my own eyes. The flight back to the States felt like it lasted forever. I sat in that cramped seat, my knee bouncing up and down with nervous energy running through every possible scenario in my head. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe everything was perfectly fine, and I would walk through that door to find Jessica waiting with open arms, thrilled to see me home early. Maybe we would laugh about how paranoid I had been, and I would hold her tight and promise never to doubt her again. I landed at the airport around 7 in the evening. I did not stop to call anyone. I did not check into a hotel to rest after the long journey. I just rented a car and drove straight home, my heart pounding harder with every mile that passed beneath my wheels. When I pulled onto our street, the first thing I noticed was Derek's truck. It was parked in the driveway right where my car used to sit before I left. The sight of it made my stomach drop, but I forced myself to stay calm. There could be a perfectly innocent explanation. Maybe something in the house needed fixing. Maybe Jessica had asked him to help with something heavy. Maybe he was just visiting. I parked on the street and walked up to the front door. My keys felt foreign in my hand, like they belonged to a different life, a different person. I slid the key into the lock as quietly as I could and pushed the door open. The first thing I saw was Derek's shoes by the entrance, his jacket hanging on the hook next to Jessica's. 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, both half empty. The television was off, but there was music playing softly from somewhere upstairs. Our bedroom. I climbed those stairs like a man walking to his own execution. Each step felt heavier than the last. The music got louder as I approached the bedroom door. It was a song that Jessica and I used to dance to in our kitchen. The irony was not lost on me. I pushed the door open. What I saw in that room will be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. There they were, my wife and my brother tangled together in the sheets of the bed that I had bought with my first military paycheck. The bed where Jessica and I had spent our first night as a married couple. The bed where we had talked about our future, about the children we would have someday, about growing old together. For a moment, nobody moved. Time seemed to freeze. Then Jessica looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. The scream that came out of her mouth was the most honest sound I had heard from her in months. Derek scrambled off the bed, nearly tripping over his own feet, his face a mask of pure terror. I just stood there. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. I did not charge at Derek the way every instinct in my body was telling me to. I just stood there, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out everything that made me human. Derek started babbling. Words spilled out of his mouth in a desperate torrent. He was sorry. He never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake. He could explain. Meanwhile, Jessica sat there crying, the sheets pulled up to her chin like they could somehow shield her from the consequences of what she had done. She said she had been lonely. She said I had abandoned her. She said she needed someone, and Derek was there. I held up my hand, and they both fell silent instantly. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat. Empty. How long, I asked. That was the only thing I wanted to know. Derek could not meet my eyes. He stared at the floor like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. Almost a year, he whispered. A year. I did the math in my head. That meant this had started just a few months after I left for basic training. Before I was even deployed. Before the distance and the danger could be used as an excuse. They had been lying to me for an entire year. Jessica's next words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was pregnant, 3 months along. She did not know for certain whose child it was, but given the circumstances, it was most likely Derek's. I looked at my brother then. Really looked at him. This was the boy I had protected with my fists and my blood. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The boy who had stood beside me on my wedding day and told everyone I was the greatest brother anyone could ask for. And all I could see now was a stranger. Derek kept apologizing. He said he had not planned for any of this to happen. He said things just developed. He said it like that was supposed to make it better. Like a year of sneaking around behind my back was some kind of accident, something that just happened without anyone making a choice. I told them both to get out of my house. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. There was something in my tone that made it clear this was not a request. Jessica packed a bag that night and moved in with her parents in another state. Derek went back to his apartment without another word. The divorce papers were filed within the week. I did not fight for anything. I did not want the furniture we had picked out together, the decorations we had hung on the walls, the memories that were now tainted beyond repair. I just wanted it to be over. 3 months later, I received news that broke whatever was left of my heart. Jessica had died from complications during childbirth. The baby did not survive either. I heard the news from my mother, who called me sobbing uncontrollably. I did not know how to feel. I did not love Jessica anymore, not after what she had done. But I had never wished her dead. I had never wanted things to end that way. Derek completely fell apart after Jessica's death. He quit his job, stopped leaving his apartment, stopped talking to anyone. My parents were devastated, not just by the loss of Jessica and the baby, but by watching their youngest son destroy himself with guilt and grief. And then slowly but surely, they started pointing fingers at me. If only I had forgiven them, my mother said. If only I had given them a second chance. The stress of the situation must have affected Jessica's pregnancy. If I had just been more understanding, maybe she would still be alive. Maybe the baby would be alive. I could not believe what I was hearing. I was the one who had been betrayed. I was the one who had come home from a war zone to find my wife in bed with my brother. And somehow, in their minds, I was the villain. 6 months passed after Jessica's death. 6 months of my parents calling me, texting me, showing up at my door unannounced. They wanted to talk. They wanted me to understand. They wanted me to forgive. I ignored most of their attempts, but eventually they managed to corner me. They organized a family meeting at their house, and my father made it clear that my attendance was not optional. I walked into that house knowing exactly what was waiting for me. The whole family was there. My parents sat on one side of the dining room table, their faces etched with grief and determination. Derek sat across from them, looking like a shadow of the person he used to be. His eyes were red and hollow, his clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost too much weight. He looked broken. My mother started crying before anyone even said a word. She talked about how the family was falling apart. She talked about how much she had already lost, and how she could not bear to lose anything more. She said that I was the oldest, the responsible one, the one who had always held everything together. She begged me to be the bigger person, to forgive Derek, to let our family heal. My father took a different approach. He talked about blood being thicker than water. He talked about how brothers needed to stick together no matter what. He said that Derek had made a terrible mistake, but he had suffered enough. Losing the woman he loved, losing the child he would never get to meet. Had he not paid enough of a price already? Derek himself barely said anything. He just sat there with tears streaming down his face, occasionally mumbling that he was sorry, that he would do anything to make things right, that he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but he was begging me anyway. Everyone looked at me. The room fell silent. They were waiting for me to do what I had always done, to fix things, to smooth things over, to sacrifice my own feelings for the sake of family harmony. I sat there for a long moment, looking at each of them in turn. My mother, who had always put family above everything. My father, who had taught me the meaning of loyalty. My brother, who had destroyed that loyalty in the worst possible way. I thought about everything. The years I had spent protecting Derek. The nights I had lain awake in Afghanistan missing my wife. The moment I had opened that bedroom door. The year of lies and betrayal. The way my own family was now asking me to pretend none of it had happened. I stood up slowly. When I spoke, my voice was calm and steady. I told them that I did not hate Derek. Hate required too much energy, too much emotion. I simply did not consider him my brother anymore. The bond we once had was broken beyond repair, and no amount of family meetings or tearful apologies could fix that. I looked at my parents and told them that if they were asking me to choose between my self-respect and maintaining a relationship with someone who had betrayed me in the worst way possible, then the choice was easy. I would choose my self-respect every single time. I told them that I was done. I was done being the one who always had to compromise, always had to sacrifice, always had to be the bigger person. I had given enough. I had lost enough. and I refused to lose myself as well. Then I walked toward the door. My mother ran after me, grabbing my arm, pleading with me to stay. My father shouted that I was tearing the family apart. Derek just sat there frozen, as if he had finally realized that there would be no forgiveness, no redemption, no happy ending. I removed my mother's hand from my arm as gently as I could. I told her that I loved her, but I could not do what she was asking. I told her that if she could not accept my decision, then I would understand, but it would not change anything. Then I walked out that door and did not look back. After that day, I requested a transfer to a base in another state. I needed distance, not just from Derek, but from everything that reminded me of the life I thought I was going to have. I needed to start over somewhere no one knew my story, where I could be William again, instead of the guy whose brother slept with his wife. The first few months were hard. I was angry all the time. Angry at Derek for his betrayal. Angry at Jessica for her lies. Angry at my parents for taking his side. Angry at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. The anger was like a poison eating away at me from the inside. I started seeing a therapist on base. It was not something I ever thought I would do, but I was desperate. I needed to talk to someone who would not judge me, who would not tell me what I should feel or how I should act. The therapist helped me understand that my anger was valid, but holding on to it was only hurting me. She taught me techniques for processing my emotions, for separating my worth from what had been done to me. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I threw myself into my work and earned promotions I had never thought possible. I reconnected with Marcus, my best friend from high school, who had moved to the same state a few years earlier. He introduced me to his circle of friends, people who accepted me without knowing or caring about my past. I rediscovered the things that made me happy. Fishing on quiet weekend mornings, reading books that had nothing to do with war or betrayal, cooking meals for myself and actually enjoying the process. Small pleasures that I had forgotten existed. 2 years after I left my parents' house for the last time, I met someone new. Her name is not important for this story. What is important is that I did not rush into anything. I took my time. I learned to trust again slowly and carefully. I learned that not everyone would hurt me the way Jessica and Derek had. Looking back now, I realize that walking away from my family that day was the hardest thing I ever did. Harder than basic training. Harder than deployment. Harder than opening that bedroom door. But it was also the most important thing I ever did for myself. I learned that forgiveness is not something you owe anyone. It is not a debt that can be demanded or an obligation that can be enforced. Forgiveness is a gift, and I get to choose who deserves to receive it. Derek did not deserve that gift. Neither did Jessica. And that is okay. I also learned that family is not just about blood. Family is about the people who show up for you, who support you, who would never dream of hurting you the way I was hurt. Marcus is more of a brother to me now than Derek ever was. The friends I made after my transfer are more of a family than the one I was born into. I do not have hatred in my heart anymore. I let that go a long time ago. Derek and my parents exist somewhere in the world living their lives, and I genuinely hope they find peace. But they do it without me, and that is a boundary I will never compromise. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes letting go of the people who hurt you is not giving up. It is growing up. It is choosing yourself. It is finding the freedom that comes from refusing to carry someone else's guilt on your shoulders. If you are watching this and you have been through something similar, I want you to know that you are not alone. And if anyone is pressuring you to forgive before you are ready or to accept treatment that you do not deserve, remember this: your peace of mind is not negotiable. Your self-respect is not something to be traded away for the comfort of others. So let me ask you this. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have stayed and tried to make peace, or would you have walked away like I did? I want to hear your thoughts, so please share them in the comments below. If this story touched you in any way, please hit that like button. If you want to hear more stories like this, make sure you subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss anything. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share this video with them. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope my story brought you something valuable, whether it is comfort, perspective, or just the knowledge that it is possible to survive betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and never forget that you deserve to be treated with respect and loyalty by the people in your life.